John Garang's early life was defined by his childhood in Sudan that would later frame the issues central to his political life. Born in 1945 into the Dinka Boer tribe, Garang was raised in a society deeply rooted in pastoralism. His early memories were marked by the sound of the gun, as his people were often engaged in providing resistance to various Arab militia and government groups. The first distinctions of economic disparity between the Arab and African communities were made evident to the young Garang at the mere age of 8 when his family sent him to school in Bahr el Ghazal in northern Sudan. During his time at the school, he lived as a domestic servant, trading his labor for an education that was afforded exclusively to Arabs and a select few Africans in Sudan. It was at this early age that Garang learned that education was the key to breaking the cycle of violence and poverty that characterized life in South Sudan. Garang would continue to strive academically in history. His performance at Bahr el Ghazal gained him a scholarship to Grinnell College in Iowa, an experience that would shape his worldview significantly. Up until this time, Garang was educated in missionary schools where the merit of the British and Christian influence in Africa was very heavily emphasized. His studies in the United States opened his eyes to the role of American imperialism in the continent and were crucial in his understanding of the neocolonialism and endemic corruption that has thus far inhibited good governance and economic development in the modern African state. He completed a BA in economics in 1969, having proven himself to be an outstanding student and a competitive athlete. His performance at Grinnell allowed him to secure a position in the United States where he earned a second degree, a BA in military science in 1971. This is in the shadow of the Vietnam War, and this time would also be crucial in influencing his decision to join the military back in Sudan. On a more personal note, it was in the United States that Garang would meet Rebecca Nyandeng, a fellow bachelor's student whom he would later marry and have 6 children with. Garang survived the hazardous conditions of his upbringing, and at 8 years old in 1956, he was one of a few from the Dinka community chosen to go to school on a wheel. This was partly a missionary school run by Southern Presbyterian missionaries who had also set up a small hospital in the town. His days as a schoolboy had begun, and from then on he entered prosperously into the world of education in pursuit of opportunities to learn. Unfortunately for Garang, his father died when he was only a young boy, and he was brought up by his mother and extended family in conditions of poverty. This meant herding cattle from an early age and frequent migrations throughout the Bahr el Ghazal and Upper Nile regions, in search of water and grazing land. It was a rough upbringing with many encounters with wild animals, and once when a lion attacked the cattle, Garang had to flee up a tree and remain there until help arrived. His family was illiterate and he had no early formal schooling in this period. However, he believes that it taught him self-reliance and mental toughness. John Garang was born into the Dinka tribe in Wangilii village, in the Upper Nile region in what was then Sudan and is now South Sudan. The largest of Sudan's some 500 tribes, the pure Dinka are considered to have resisted the Islamic pressures of the Arab world the longest, with many maintaining their traditional beliefs and strong animist religion. Their pastoral lifestyle consists of cattle herding around the various regions of southern Sudan, and frequent conflicts with neighbors, whether they be other Dinka sections or surrounding tribes, are typically regarding cattle rustling. Garang entered Rumbek Secondary School in 1962, and in the same year that Sudan gained independence from the British, he was one of few selected southern Sudanese to be awarded the opportunity to journey to the United States for further studies. His guardianship at the time was transferred to a high school teacher working in the Ministry of Education. He attended Grinnell College in Grinnell, Iowa, and in 1969 was awarded a BA in economics. During his time in the United States, he was exposed to an entirely new realm of racial dynamics that were a new experience to him. During the era of the 1960s, for a young student from a developing nation, the U.S. was a tumultuous place of political and social contention. Additionally, Garang was offered insight into the Cuban Revolution from a university professor, a topic that would later influence his comprehension of guerrilla warfare dramatically. After considering a military career, Garang pursued a master's degree at Iowa State, also in economics. Step by step, he was saying goodbye to any aspirations of a profession in the military. In that these aspirations would later become his fate, it gives understanding to Garang's long-term resourcefulness in his pursuits. In the attempt to explain the attainment of his masters, Garang has been noted as saying, "I borrowed money," cheaply summarizing the great struggle of his endeavor. At the heart of Garang's 5-year jubilation plan was the idea that the freedoms of the inaugural Comprehensive Peace Agreement could largely benefit all of Sudan, but such a plan faced numerous obstacles. First and foremost, the southern Sudanese had suffered greatly during the Second Civil War and would need to realize the tangible gains of peace to be convinced of its benefits. Many were still scarred by the brutal war that had ravaged their land and fled to the north out of fear. It was a priority of the SPLM to repatriate these people and to repair the infrastructure that had been severely damaged. Lastly, in accordance with creating an atmosphere for a democratic change in government, Garang and the SPLM would need to find a way to reconcile their disputes with the National Congress Party. Garang's term as first vice president of Sudan and president of the semi-autonomous region of southern Sudan was marked by his retention of the position of commander-in-chief. The retention of this dual position was decried as a violation of the interim national constitution by several southern Sudanese political figures and even members of the SPLM. However, Garang stated that he would only surrender his military command upon a secure peace in Sudan, and that the chief of staff position would be delegated to a southern Sudanese. His refusals caused rifts both within the SPLM and between the SPLM and its South Sudanese constituency, perpetuating a pattern of disunity that has dogged the southern region for many years. His attempts to secure a positive ending to the Darfur conflict and force the rebels and the government into peace talks were stalled, and his ability to check the power of National Congress hardliners was somewhat limited. His death in Ugandan helicopter crash in August 2005 dealt a severe blow to the prospects of Sudanese peace and further exacerbated tensions within the SPLM. After the Anya Naya rebellion and the Addis Ababa Accords had given southern Sudanese a glimpse of independence and had given many of the southern Sudanese a taste of self-rule, the Arab-dominated government had grown increasingly suspicious of John Garang and various other southern Sudanese army officers. Garang was soon to be transferred and his future compromised by the conservative northern regime. It was then in 1983 that the Second Sudanese Civil War began after Garang gathered his supporters from the south and centralized the southern rebel movement into a guerrilla army of over 12,000, which he named the Sudan People's Liberation Army, SPLA. The SPLA fought to dismantle the policies and social systems that had been detrimental to the south, and it aimed to create a secular and democratic new Sudan. The early years of the SPLA were seen to be extremely disorganized and often led into alliances with southern politicians and military commanders who had personal ambitions and grievances from the First Civil War. They often had no vision of a united southern front against Khartoum. Garang managed to maintain the unity of southern rebel forces by considering the grievances of other ethnic groups and not just his own Dinka tribe, thus preventing inter-ethnic conflict between the southern minorities. Garang formulated two strategies for the SPLA. These were initially defensive, to harass the enemy, deny them access to resources, and divide the enemy's forces. Once the SPLA had achieved military and political advantages, it would switch to an aggressive strategy, to engage and destroy the enemy's forces, capture and hold territory, and force the enemy to sue for peace. Throughout the war, the SPLA focused more on the defensive strategy as they had few weapons and military resources in comparison with the Sudanese military. Following his assassination attempt, Garang was